Assalamu alaikum. This is lecture number 31 of Global Business Management. Today we are going to do the revision of previous chapters, and we will try to go through the main points of the first 7 chapters in this lecture. And the first lecture that we started, that was an introductory lecture, and we did discuss basic definitions of the international business, and then we formally we started with the first chapter, which was the international business environment. In international business environment, we did discuss about what's the international business. International business is a business which is undertaken across the domestic market, across the border of a domestic country. All those such operations will involve any business activity across the borders are considered as international business. International business is different compared to the business which is solely undertaken in the domestic market. International business has special features which include the political and legal differences, cultural differences, economic differences, currency differences, and restrictions of the trade and the cost of difference. These are the different features which make global business different from the domestic business. In the first one, like political and legal differences. Legal and political differences, international business encounter different environment in terms of political and legal perspectives. A firm which is solely based in the domestic market knows about what are the political situation in this market and what are the legal requirements to conduct the business. While on the other hand, when we talk about the international business, global business, firm when enter in the another market, in the foreign market, that firm is going to face a different political and legal environment. And similarly about culture, that firm is going to face different culture in the foreign market, and these cultural attributes can be encouraging, can be positive for the firm, or it can be the deterring features that can be such features that can create the obstacles in the way of conducting the business in that market. Similarly, the economic features, economic conditions in that country can also be different and can create some sort of a trouble or some sort of encouraging some attribute for the global business. If the economic situation in terms of, if we talk about the level of development is high in that market, my firm have the better prospects. Might be it can be we can take in this perspective that firm can have a better prospects, that because people have a buying power. On the other hand, if the economic development is really low, and people don't have the economic buying power, but on the other hand, it really depends on the nature of the industry. If we talk about the oil and gas sector, this oil and gas sector is mostly carried out in the developing economies, in economies where might be the economic growth is not so high, but it's really lucrative markets for the oil and gas sectors. Similarly, the currency, the international business has to face the different currency and has to conduct the business in different currency, or at least they have to transfer because it's they have to transfer the currency into the different currency of the different market, and in doing so they are going to face the currency fluctuations and currency restrictions. Firm which is solely based in domestic market does not concern with the restrictions across the borders, trade restrictions or trade quotas or tariffs. They are not concerned with that thing, rather not directly related with those aspects, but the global business is directly affected with the restrictions in the markets, or the barriers, the agreement, the regional integrations, these sort of things will directly affect on the global business. The last aspect is if the cost of distance. If the foreign market is located really far away from the domestic market, the cost of distance will really affect on the global business. After that, we had discussed about what are the forces of global business, and among those forces there are profitability, growth, domestic market constraints, competition, government policies. In search of some profit margin, to increase their profit margin, to go in search of the growth opportunities, firms pursue the foreign markets. They enter in the foreign market. And the next point is domestic market constraints. Domestic market, there are certain forces which, if the domestic market's conditions are not facilitating firms to undertake the business, these conditions will definitely push firms to go out from the domestic market to the international market. Similarly, the next factor is the competition. If the competition in the domestic market is high, it pushes firms to go out from the domestic to foreign market. And the last one is government policies. Government policies can influence business, can influence the global business in a positive way or in the negative way. In a positive way, government can facilitate the international business, international activity, the trade, the flow of trade across the countries, across the border. On the other hand, the negative policies or the restraining policies can discourage international business, and it can discourage firms to go out from the domestic to foreign market. After that, 4 types of international orientations we had discussed: the ethnocentrism, polycentrism, regionocentrism, and geocentrism. And among these types of international orientation, we had discussed about the different features, what sort of a strategic orientations firms are going to choose. Then we had discussed the globalization stages. Initially the firm is purely domestic firm. Then small foreign activity, they undertake some small foreign activity like export or import to just check the market, to get familiar with the international market, to get familiar with the factors or environments which are most important in that market, to know those markets, to learn and to get the experience of the foreign market. They start doing international business in a small activity which involve only a small level of capital commitment. Then once they feel that, once they experience this thing and that activity is successful, and when they learn experience and they know how to how to undertake the business in the foreign market, they become in a position that where they can invest in a larger amount. They get the confidence, and then they invest in a larger amount, and they become international company. International company might be they start operating in the different markets. Initially might be they have started, they are operating only in a single market, but later on when they become the international company, they could start operating in the larger markets. Similarly, subsequently firm can become the multinational company, where firm is operating in several markets, and the transnational company across the continent firm is operating. This is the gradual process, and it can be a gradual process. It can be some firms directly operate from, they jump from the purely domestic firm to the international company. Okay, the drivers. What are the different drivers of internationalization? The first and most important driver is liberalization. Liberalization is the factor which facilitated firms to go out from the domestic market to international market. This factor is more influential in the developing countries or in the emerging countries, as we have seen the emergence of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. These economies that they have emerged from the developing countries to emerging economies. In liberalization, most importantly, the access of finance was a really important factor. The second factor was the structural changes within the market, and the third one was to facilitate changing of policies in such a way that facilitate firms to go out from the domestic to foreign market. In access to finance, the government changed the policies and provided the finance to domestic firms so that they can undertake the international business. The next one is the technology. Technology is also a really huge factor which contributed the international business. Because of the technology, the depth of distance becomes zero, and now there are no boundaries of countries, and the companies can operate while sitting in the domestic market. They can operate throughout the globe, and without having a single office in any other market, they can operate in the international market. Multinational companies, that's another factor. Because of the multinational companies are going in all the markets across the globe, and because this thing increases the competition, because of the entrance of multinational companies in the across the globe in that markets, they increase the competition within the domestic markets and pushed domestic firms to go out from the domestic to foreign market. World Wide Web, similarly, like technology, the web, the internet, it facilitated firms to start operating in the international market. Like we can take the example of, like, we can see this thing, how import-export thing is really feasible and really easy to conduct through the internet. And product development cost, because of the technology, the cost of production has been reduced. And competition, again because of the multinational companies, and within the domestic firms, only because of the domestic firms in the domestic markets, the competition has also increased. And regional integration, countries are getting together, regions are getting together, and the different regional blocks have been formulated in last 2 decades. And because of this, like the BRICS, the NAFTA, ASEAN, these different regional integration facilitated firms to do the trade across the borders. Leverage advantages by experience, experience transfer, economy of scale, resource utilization, and global strategy. And the next point is the leverage advantages by experience. And because of the passage of time, firms which is operating in the international market, they are getting experience. They are getting leverage because of the experience as compared to domestic firms. With passage of time, they learn how to operate in the international market. And second factor is the economy of scale. When they are producing at the large number, take the example of international firm who, in comparison with the domestic firm, they have the larger demand of products because they are selling in the several markets, and because they have the larger quantity of they have to produce in a larger quantity. They can avail the benefit of economy of scale. They can reduce the cost per unit cost by increasing the number of products. Resource utilization, how to optimally utilize the resources, this is what they learn. And the global strategy, they learn how to make a global strategy with the passage of time. These things comes with the passage of time and by learning with the experience, and this is called leverage advantage, which the global firms gets from operating in the global markets. Okay, there are restraining forces, external restraining forces and internal restraining forces. External restraining forces mean such forces which are prohibiting firms to go out from the domestic to foreign market. External restraining forces mean the forces in the environment which prohibit firms to go out, like the tariff and non-tariff barriers, or taxation, or unavailability of skilled labor, or some labor availability, unavailability of the lack of political stability in that market, and or the second factor that can be, might be the domestic governments in the domestic market provide so much incentive for firms to stay in the domestic market that can be more lucrative for firms to stay in the domestic market rather than go out. And in internal restraining forces, internal restraining forces, we have said that there is a possibility that firms can have low resources. They don't have the sufficient resources in terms of capital, in terms of human resource. That's why they are unable to go out in the international market. Then we had discussed international business decision making. There are 4 steps involved in the international decision making. The first one is, what are the objectives? They are resources, market potential, environmental factors. These are the different objectives. A firm has to see the internal capabilities. They have to do the internal scanning of the firms. Need to see what are the company's objective, how much resources they have, what is the market potential of the tentative market, environment, what are the environmental factors there in that market. Once the company is decided that they are intending to go out, then the second step is they have to choose in which market they are intended to go. They have to select the market, and in the third one, the third step, they have to decide which entry mode they have to choose. Either they can use exporting, FDI, within FDI the joint venture, merger and acquisition, or greenfield investment, or licensing, or franchising. These are the various modes of entry, and they have to choose. Each mode of entry have its pros and cons, and firm have to choose which mode of entry is best suitable for them. And in the last mode is, and in the last step, they have to decide international structure decision. They have to change the structure of the business of their organization because of the shift from domestic to international markets. They shift in their operations. Business environment. There are 2 types of business environment: domestic and international, and global. Domestic environment is, in fact, there are 3 business. We can categorize them into the 3 business environments: domestic, which is purely based in the domestic market; international business environment which is in the whole. Domestic is home country, international is in the host country, and global mean across the globe. Domestic market environment situations, the conditions in the domestic market. International mean conditions are treaties or some agreement with the international market. And the global mean in overall integration, overall the rules WTO applies in that market. And global mean is more relevant with the global agencies. Global mean WTO, what sort of rules they have defined to do the business in that market. And self-reliance criteria. Firm has to be self-reliant when they are going to go out from the domestic to foreign market. The next one is the culture. Integrated. What is the culture? Culture is the integrated system of learned behavior patterns that characterizes other members of any given society. How you define the features or characteristic or behavior of a given society is called the culture. High context culture and low context culture. These are two different. High context culture are the where the context is really influential. Low context culture where the context is less influential on the culture. High context mean like the Gulf countries, Iran, North Korea, Japan. These are the high context culture. Low context culture examples are the Europe, USA. Elements of culture. There are three main important elements of culture: the language, the religion, and manners and customs. These are the three most important elements of culture which define, which shape, which alter the culture. Values are the shared beliefs or group norms within the society, attitudes or evaluations of alternative based on values. Values, we know about values are the norms, standards, guidelines, these what we believe in, what the society, our individuals within the society believe in, and collectively it's this thing, these values are shape the values of the society. Material element, it refers to the impact of technology and as a result how a society organizes its activities. Economic, it includes in economic infrastructure, social infrastructure, financial infrastructure. These are the different material elements which also affects on the, which define, which shape the culture. Economic infrastructure, social infrastructure. Economic infrastructure mean to what extent they have the stability within the economy, health care resource facilities, educational facilities. Social infrastructure, the internet or technology, to what extent they have, the people are familiar with the technology. Financial infrastructure, the banking facilities. Cultural convergence. Then there is another factor which is called cultural convergence. Cultural convergence is the concept the people use, that because of the advent of the technologies, countries, or we can say the markets, are converging towards the same thing, and their choices, their behavior and their cultures are getting together to a same point because of the culture and because of the technology and the media and this sort of thing. Like we can talk about the music, we can talk about the dresses, the fashion, trends. These are the things that people are across the globe, the liking and disliking are at a greater extent getting similar because of the this media and technology, and this is called the cultural convergence. Each culture has clear statement of what is acceptable and what is not. Each culture defines what is acceptable in that culture and what is forbidden in that culture. Education plays an important role in passing on and sharing the culture. Okay, another important factor is education. Education also defines the level of education. If the country, if the people of the economy are in that market are really educated, might be they will have a different culture compared to the less educated cultures. Cultures where people are less educated. After that, two types of knowledge. There are two types of knowledge: objective, and the first one is objective and factual, which we get from the communication, education, R&D, and the second one is experimental education, by involving oneself in new culture. When you experimental education, that you learn by doing, and when you indulge in that culture, then you learn that thing. Cultural lifestyles can be classified into 4 dimensions: individualism, power distance, uncertainty, avoidance, and masculinity. This is the 4 dimensions are defined by Hofstede model in 1969, and they have defined to what extent countries are, the people within the countries are individualistics or collectivistics. Power distance mean class system. Uncertainty avoidance mean risk avoidance, into what extent they can take risk. It directly relates with the judiciary. If the rule of law is really strong in the country, people can take risk because if they can go to the courts. If the rule of law is really weak, and judiciary system is really corrupt, in developing countries, then people avoid to go to the courts and bring their matters to the courts. Really, they tend to avoid the risk. And the last one is masculinity, predefined gender roles of men and women. These are the 4 different dimensions of culture. Okay, next one is international trade and investment policy. What are the basic rationale of trade policies? The domestic policy actions of most governments aim to increase the standard of living of citizens and to improve the quality of life and to achieve full employment. The basic concept, the basic aim of making the trade policy is to increase the living standards of the citizens and to improve the quality of life, and by providing them employment. These policy goals and international trade relates indirectly. I mean, if the country is involving or have a high level of international trade, these goals will meet. I mean, they are interrelated with each other. For instance, if the borders are open and the countries are encouraging other firms to enter in the market, of course the FDI, foreign direct investment, is coming into the country and it creates the job. People are getting job. That company, those companies, that FDI also bringing the technology, also might be improve the infrastructure within the country. These are the things that directly affects on the employment, these goals of the government. Each country develops its own domestic policy, which varies, may cause conflict. Okay, I mean, every country is going to have its domestic policy with intent. They make those policy with aim to with those such intentions to improve the quality of life of their citizens, and they achieve the full employment and this sort of thing. And when every country has its own policy, domestic policy, and everybody is only concerned with their own market, their own people. When two different countries are interacting with each other, this one have its own policy with best interest of its own people. The same goes for this thing. That will not match with each other. That will definitely can cause conflict, and that can clash with each other. This one will intend to gain more benefit with the trade, and they are going to do the same thing. And what if imagine the scenario of the whole world? I mean, there will be a huge conflicts when they are going to undertake the international trade. In order to settle down, in order to solve such conflicts, there are some international organizations. Like in the beginning, they have the ITO, then GATT, most favored nation. They have the most favored nation clause, and then we have the World Trade Organization. 3 major changes have occurred over the time in global policy environment: a reduction of domestic policy influences, a weakening of traditional international institutions, and sharpening of the conflict between industrialized and the developing nations. Okay, there are with the passage of time, the 3 different things happens and which are noticeable. The first one, domestic policy, the influence of, because there is so integration across the countries, across the market, the influence of domestic policy is have been reduced because of the international organizations, because of the countries are getting aware of the benefits of international trade with each other, and because of these things, the reduction of domestic policy influences, domestic policy influence has been reduced. The second one is traditional international institutions are getting weaker. Why? I mean, focus initially when they have the DAAT, they have the focus to reduce the non-tariff barriers, and they were successful in doing so. Later on, they changed into a WTO. At that time, right to establish it within the country without personal presence. Disputes, like, okay, with the passage of time, when they made the WTO, they were more focused on non-tariff related barriers, which are more difficult to remove or difficult to handle. Second one, there were more issues with the agriculture related related issues, agriculture related trade, and international institutions couldn't handle that thing. Another thing is institution there was some issues like firms are not physically sitting or operating in the another country, are not opening the office, or not physically go there, but they are operating, they are doing a business through the internet, they are doing that thing. And how to handle that issue, this sort of trade, the international institution couldn't handle this thing. And similarly, inclusion of social causes such as labor laws, competition, immigration, these are the different factors which many countries believe that international organization like WTO should solve those issues, should deal those issues as well. But they are international organizations are not dealing this thing. That's why they are getting weaker with the passage of time. The last one is the difference between the developed and developing countries are increasing. Trade restrictive measures. Tariffs are taxes on the value of imported goods. Quotas are restrictions on the number of foreign products that can be imported. Non-tariff barriers include testing, certification, simply bureaucratic hurdles which result in restricting imports. These are the three different types of trade restrictive measures. Okay, then there is one anti-dumping law that firms cannot sell their products at the rate which domestic market cannot afford. Non-tariff barriers, preference of domestic bidders, these incompatibility of international standards, and tightening market access. These are the different non-tariff related barriers. Effects: high cost, shift to product mode, and efficiency loss. These are the different sort of effects which can appear because of the trade restrictive measures. Another chapter that we had studied was the politics and law, how politics and law influence the international business, the home country perspective and the host country perspective. We have to consider, when we are trying to understand the influence of politics and law, we have to see the impact of politics and law from the both perspective, from the international market and from the home country and from the host country. Political and legal environment and international what are the political and legal environment in the home country, and what are the political and legal environment in the host country, and what are the international laws and which affects both these countries. Major areas of government activities that are of concern to the international business are embargoes and sanctions, export controls, regulation of international business behavior. These are the three areas where government influence and government control, and these three areas can affect on the international business. The first one is the sanctions, embargoes. The second one is export controls. Export might be the firm is controlling the export. Regulations, regulation of international behavior might be to a certain extent the international business is regulated by the government, and they are interfering in the free flow of international trade. Sanctions and embargo refer to the government actions that distorts free flow of trade in goods and services for political purpose rather than economic purpose. They impose sanctions and sanctions on the free flow of trade just because of political purpose, not because of the economic, for the benefits of for the citizens. Export controls. Most countries have export control system designed to deny or at least delay the acquisition of strategically important goods rivals. Export control firms have export control system to deny or at least delay the strategically important goods from the rivals. For instance, what they do in this sort of control, given contact with export, they try to follow these three steps. The first one is, should a given product be exported to a given country for use by a given firm? Mean they, for each and every product they define, they have the list, what sort of country, which sort of countries, and which sort of products are prohibited. We cannot confirm, we cannot undertake the business with that country. We cannot export these products to that country. Or for certain firm, they have the country, these regulatory bodies, they have the list of the firms with whom it's not allowed for the domestic firms to undertake the business. Because of collapse of Soviet Union Eastern Bloc, focus is shifted to third world countries, losing bond between allied nations, availability of technology from other resources, speed of change and rapid dissemination of information and innovation around the world, the use of equipment. So, these are the different factors which has been observed and which has been affected on the international business, which change the scenario of international trade across the globe. The first one is the collapse of Soviet Union and Eastern Bloc. Because the Soviet Union has been, the former bloc has been collapsed, and a lot of countries have emerged from the developing economies to transition economies. And the focus, because of this collapse of the Eastern Bloc, now focus of the international trade is shifted from the Eastern Bloc to emerging countries, from the third world countries. And initially, immediate after the Second World War, the allied nations are really was together, and they were collectively operating, and they were monitoring the international business. And because after the World War, with the passage of time, this bond has been loosened up. And next one is with the advent of technology. Many other countries have that technology as well. And if the firms cannot access the technology from certain countries, they can get that technology from the other sources as well. Speed of change and rapid dissemination information and innovation around the world. Level of innovation and the speed at which the information is disseminated across the globe is so fast. And because of this fast transformation of the information, the level of international trade has been changed. Regulating international behavior through boycotts, antitrust laws, bribery, general acceptable standards, and ethics. These are the different things which directly regulate the international behavior. Political risk and actions. Confiscation, this is the one thing the government can do. They can confiscate the property or assets of international business. Expropriation, a form of government takeover in which the firm's owners are compensated. And domestication, the government demands transfer of ownership and management responsibility. And intellectual property right, risk of losing their core competitive advantage. Somebody is going to steal your technology. Okay, now there are three types of risk: economic risk, political risk, and how you are going to manage these risks. Legal risk. Economic risk means currency control, taxes, prices control. These are the different sort of risks, risk associated with the currency, with the taxes and the prices control. Political risk might be they are going to confiscate or expropriate or domesticate your property, your business. Operating and transfer risk might be the country can stop, the government can stop the transferring of money from the one market to another. Managing risk and legal system, code and common. There are two types of, if we classify the legal system across the globe, there are code and the common legal systems. Then we had discussed the international trade theory. Free trade refers to the situation where a government does not attempt to influence through quotas or duties what its citizens can buy from another country, or what they can produce or sell to another country. This is called the free trade. Free trade, they can do, the citizen, they can buy and sell their products and services without any interference of the government. The pattern of international trade are difficult to explain. Mercantilism makes a crude case for the government involvement in promoting export and limiting import. Under the mercantilism, government's intention is to increase the export and decrease the import. In 1976, Adam Smith suggested that countries differ in their ability to produce goods efficiently. A country has an absolute advantage in the production of a product when it is more efficient than any other country in producing it. A country has an absolute advantage producing a product when it's more efficient. Mean country has absolute advantage if that country is able to produce that product more efficiently as compared to other countries. According to Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage, it makes sense for a country to specialize in the production of one good, those goods that is produced most efficiently, and to buy the goods that is produced less efficiently from the other countries, even if this means buying goods from the other countries that it could produce more efficiently. The Ricardo theory is based on comparative advantage. If one country is good at producing product A and country B is good at producing product B, despite that country A can produce the product B, they are less efficient compared to the other country. What they should do, they should produce the product A and export it, and import the product B from the other country, despite they are able to produce product B as well. But the important thing is, this is called the comparative advantage. Comparatively they are good with the other country, comparatively they are good at producing product A and compared to the other country. That's why they have to focus on the comparative advantage. Assumption of competitive advantage theory. The simple example of comparative advantage makes a number of assumptions. Only two countries are involved and two goods. Zero transportation costs, similar prices and values. Resources are mobile between goods within countries but not across countries. Constant returns to scale, fixed stocks of resources, and no effects on income distribution within countries. These are different assumptions under the comparative advantage theory. Samuelson criticized this comparative theory, and they said that resources do not always move freely from one economy to another. The ability to offshore services jobs that were traditionally not internationally mobile may have the effect of a mass inward migration into the United States, where wage would then fall. This one is saying that the resources, Samuelson's critique is based on the assumption. He is saying that there is not only two countries, and a cost of transportation is really huge, and resources cannot always freely available and move freely from one economy from one activity to the another activity. And studies exploring the relationship between trade and economic growth suggest that countries that adopt a more open stance towards international trade enjoy higher growth rate than those that close their economy to the trade. Trade increases stock of resources. The trade increases efficiency. Okay, because the study is also suggesting that because the trade is increasing the stock of resources, because the money is coming in the country, the employment, the other technology, and the level of trade also increases the efficiency. Mean they are bringing the multinational companies also bringing the technology. They are transferring this technology to the domestic industries, and because of the entrance of the foreign countries, the competition increases within the domestic market, and because of that competition, domestic firms are also forced to increase their level of quality, increase some sort of innovation. And the last thing is economy of scale. Because of economy of scale, level of cost of production is reduced. Because of these trade benefits, the countries who are open for the international trade, they are now more developed as compared to the countries who close their borders. Heckscher and Ohlin argued that competitive advantage arises from the difference in national factor endowments, relative, not absolute. National factor endowment mean what factor endowment mean the things that the country is granted from God, or different national factor endowment. What are the resources that country is benefited by the nature? And these benefits, these resources should be considered in terms of relatively, not in absolute terms. Relative terms mean if we talk about the oil and gas, might be this oil and gas is also available in Pakistan, but we are going to see in relative terms. Relative to Pakistan, there is a huge number in the amount of oil and gas is higher in Gulf countries. Same goes for other resources. And even we can talk about the same thing for the high skilled and low skilled things as well, mean the availability of labor. In 1953, Wesley Leontoff postulated that since US was relatively abundant in capital compared to other nations, the US would be an exporter of the capital intensive goods and the importer of labor intensive goods. However, he found that US exports were less capital intensive than US imports, exporting labor intensive. This was the really contradictory or some surprising finding of Leontoff, that the US have to export more capital intensive things rather than importing, but the US exports were less capital intensive than US import. That was a surprising finding. In mid of 60s, Raymond Vernon proposed the product life cycle theory that suggests that as products mature, both the location of sale and optimal production location will change, affecting the flow and direction of trade. With the passage of time, location of sale and location of production changes, which changes the flow and direction of trade. Vernon, they have explained this example with the X-ray machine. How the US made this thing, and then gradually they started to sell, to export to the European countries. Then they started to build in the European countries, and later on they started to build in the developing countries. And at that moment, rather than making those X-rays machines in the USA, they were building in the third world countries and exporting to the USA. With the passage of time, location of sale and the location of production is changed, and trade of flow, direction of trade is changed as well. Before initially it was from the US to Europe, and then Europe to developing countries, and later on it was not only from the USA to other countries. It was from other countries, especially developing countries, to Europe to the USA. Economy of scale is the first thing. Another some concept, economy of scale, that we are well aware of. First mover advantage, whoever enters first in the market, they are going to get some benefits, and the pattern of trade. Porter's 1990 study tried to explain why a nation achieves international success in a particular industry and identify 4 attributes that promote or impede the creation of competitive advantage. Factor endowments. A nation's position in factors of production can lead to competitive advantage and natural resources or human capital. Factor endowment is the first factor. The next one is the demand conditions and within the market, relating and supporting industries. And if the relating industries are available within the market, then overall trade will be increased. The last one is the firm strategy, structure and rivalry. These are the 4 different factors that the Porter proposed, and these 4 attributes promote or impede the competitive advantage of the firms in the international business. We have discussed the FDI, foreign direct investments. Foreign direct investment occurs when a firm invests directly in a new facilities to produce or market in a foreign country. The firm becomes a multinational enterprise. When they conduct FDI activity, then that firm is considered as the multinational firm. FDI can be in the form of greenfield investment. The establishment, what is a greenfield investment, is the the establishment of the whole new operation in a foreign country from scratch. It can be FDI can be in the form of a greenfield investment or acquisition, merger and acquisition. And in merger and acquisition, they are going to collaborate with the existing firm in that market, while in a greenfield investment they have to build from the scratch. The flow of FDI refers to the amount of FDI undertaken over a given time period. The flow of FDI refers to the amount of FDI, and the stock of FDI refers to the total accumulated value of foreign-owned assets at a given time. The last one is gross fixed capital formation, the total amount of capital invested in factories, store, office building, and FDI has grown more rapidly than the world trade and world output because firms still fear the threat of protectionism. Democratic political institutions and free market economies have encouraged FDI. Globalization is forcing firms to maintain the presence around the world. There are several reasons of this pattern. Firms are worried about the protectionist measures and see FDI as a way of getting around the trade barriers. Because in export might be the firms are getting export barriers, and because of in order to avoid those barriers, rather than indulging in themselves into the import thing, they are undertaking instead of export, they are doing the FDI. Changes in the economic and political policies of many countries have opened their markets to investments. Third, many firms see the world as their market now. Many manufacturers are expanding into the foreign countries to take advantage of lower cost advantage and to be closer to customers and so on. And in that case, the China is the most famous example. Firm prefer to acquire existing assets because firm prefer to do the merger and acquisition rather than greenfield investment, because merger and acquisition are quicker to execute, easier and perhaps less risky, and firm believe that they can increase the efficiency of an acquired unit by transferring capital, technology and management skills. Then there are some comparison of export and licensing versus FDI, and we had discussed about the benefits of all those modes. Internationalization theory suggests that licensing has three drawbacks compared to FDI. Firm can give away valuable technological know-how to the potential foreign competitors. Does not give a firm the control over manufacturing and marketing strategies. The firm competitive advantage may be based on its management and marketing and manufacturing capabilities. Because of these, and because if the competitive advantage lies in this sort of marketing management and management capabilities, it's not possible for a firm to undertake the licensing mode. Why do firms in the same industry undertake the FDI at about the same time and the same location? This is the one important question which was raised by the Knickerbocker, and he answered this thing that the firms follow their domestic competitor overseas. And Vernon says that firms undertake FDI at particular stages in the life cycle of products, like Xerox. This theory did well to explain the several things. Later on, the Dunning electric paradigm is proposed, and this Dunning belongs to the University of Reading, UK, and he proposed that the location-specific advantages and externalities. And he said that how does the government attitude affect the FDI? One with the radical view, this is that the perspective argues that the multinational is an instrument of imperialistic domination and the means of exploiting host countries for the benefit of their capitalist home countries. They are just trying to capture the resources, and they are trying to influence within the economy. This is the radical view. Free market view is which argues international productivity should be distributed among the countries according to the theory of comparative advantage. And in between these two extremes, there is a pragmatic view, pragmatic nationalism, which argue the FDI has both positive and negative, and the countries should consider the both positive and negative and see which activity is most beneficial for the country. Host country benefits. There are three host country benefits. The first one is resource transfer effects, and the second one is the jobs, employment one, and the third one is FTA helps the business, the balance of payment in two ways. The FDI and is substitute for the imports of goods and services and increases the current account. When multinational companies export product to other countries, FDI affects competition and economic growth, and there are three costs involved in inward FDI. The first one is the adverse effect on the competition. The second thing is negative effect on the balance of payments. And the third one is loss of national autonomy. These are the three negative aspects that we had discussed earlier of inward FDI. And there are some home and host countries strategies which encourage and discourage FDI, and decision to export, license and FDI. Each exporting, licensing and FDI, all these modes have their positives and pros and cons, positive effects and negative effects on the current business, and firm has to choose in between those modes while considering the benefits and disadvantages. Then we had discussed the regional integration. In regional integration, we have seen the level of integration. Within the level of integration, we have discussed the three levels of integration: the free trade area, the customs union, and the common market. And the political union involves a central political apparatus that coordinates the economic, social, and foreign policy of the member states. The EU is the headquarters towards the least partial political union. All countries gain from the trade and investment. Regional economic integration, which mainly focus on the positive sum game, and linking countries together, make them more dependent with each other. This was the basic concept behind the economic integration across the regions. Then we had discussed about what are the benefits of making the EU and bringing the euro within that region. Euro is saving from having a handle one currency rather than the many. It is easier to compare prices across the Europe. Cost of production is reduced, giving the strong boost to the development of highly liquid pan-European central market like Nasdaq, and it increase the range of investment options. These were the several benefits that the whole European region have availed because of the single currency. And the North American Free Trade Area, then we had discussed what is NAFTA, North American Free Trade Area, which includes the USA, Canada and Mexico. The main intention of establishing NAFTA was to abolish the tariffs almost at 99% of the goods, and remove barriers on the cross-border flow of services, and protects intellectual property rights, and remove most restriction on FDI between the member countries. These are the main intentions, main objectives of making the NAFTA. Then we had seen the Andean Pact between the South American countries, and Mercosur Free Trade Agreement between Brazil and Argentina, and later on Paraguay and Uruguay and Venezuela joined those countries. And in Asian countries we have seen the ASEAN, which currently includes the Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, Myanmar, Laos and Cambodia. And in African region we have the regional integration in terms of East African Community, which was launched in 2001. Foreign exchange market. In foreign exchange market we have seen the exchange rate, how exchange rate influenced the free trade across the countries. And we had discussed about the spot exchange rate and the forward exchange rate. Spot exchange rate is a rate at which a foreign exchange dealer converts one currency into another currency, and the forward exchange rate is a rate used for hedging in the forward market. And one concept called the currency swap is also discussed, which is the simultaneous purchase and sale of a given amount of a foreign exchange for two different value dates. Swaps are involves the international business and banks, and it can happen between the banks and between the governments. Subsequently, we had discussed the law of one price, which states that in competitive markets free of transportation costs and barriers to trade, identical products sold in different countries must sell at the same price. Law of one price say that in the competitive market, which have no trade barriers, the price of goods should be same across the borders. And we had discussed the purchasing power parity, and later on we had discussed the Fisher effects, and all these things leads to the concept of supply of money, which leads to the demand and inflation and buying power, and which ultimately affects on the currency rate. The last concept in this chapter, we had discussed the bandwagon effects, which occurs when the expectation on the part of traders turn into the self-fulfilling prophecies. Traders can join the bandwagon and move exchange rate based on group expectations. The international Fisher effect states that any two countries, the spot exchange rate should change in an equal amount but in the opposite direction to the difference in the nominal interest rate between two countries. And the purchasing power parity argues that given relatively efficient markets, the price of a basket of goods should be roughly equal in each country. And in inefficient market school argues that the companies can improve the foreign exchange markets estimate a future exchange rate by investing in forecasting services. And forecasting services mean firms can acquire the forecasting services to predict the future exchange rate. And the currency is freely convertible when the government of the country allows both residents and non-residents to purchase the amount. And externally convertible mean only the foreign investor is allowed to convert the currency, and the non-convertible mean when neither foreign investor nor the local residents are allowed to convert the currency. And we had discussed the lead strategy and the lag strategy in the buy forward exchange rate. That's it for today. Thank you. Allah Hafiz.